Hello, I'm Bruce Huhmann, and today we're going to continue our discussion of types of ethical theories, including virtue ethics and justice and fairness approaches to ethics. In this lecture, we continue our review of normative ethics. Normative ethics involves those actions that you ought to perform. So normative ethics involves setting up a way to determine right from wrong. The golden rule is a classic example of normative ethics. We should do to others what we would want them to do to us. Well, since I don't want Jenny to steal my laptop, it's wrong for me to steal her laptop. Since I would want people to give me directions if I were lost, then I should stop and help someone else who is lost by giving them directions if they ask. Because it's normative ethics, I can use the golden rule to reason out whether or not any possible action is right or wrong. The golden rule is an example of a normative theory that establishes a single standard or yardstick against which we judge all actions. Other normative theories focus on a set of foundational standards or a set of good character traits. In some of our previous lectures, we've examined the normative ethical theories related to consequentialism, including utilitarianism and hedonism, as well as egoism. In each of these consequentialist theories, the outcomes or consequences are used to decide if a course of action is right or wrong. The difference between these is the type of outcome that's important. With utilitarianism, the important thing is utility. With hedonism, it's pleasure. And with egoism or libertarianism, the consequences that promote my rational self-interest are what makes something ethical. We're going to continue looking at ethical theories. In this lecture, virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is normative in that the norm or standard of behavior is that we always choose behavior that helps us build our character or helps us become a better person. According to Aristotle, character reveals the class of things that people choose or avoid. Aristotle said that repeatedly doing ethical or virtuous behavior helps us acquire a certain character. Philosophers over the ages have gone back to this idea time and time again. The idea that acting ethically builds character has recently led to the character counts movement in education, for example. An ethical or virtuous character is stable and enduring. It's not just a product of good fortune, but is developed over time. Also, developing an ethical character means moving toward excellence, or the best that one can be. Thus, the ancient Greek philosophers claimed that ethical or virtuous activity completes and perfects human life. Finally, a good character increases our power and helps us be better leaders. Aristotle also said, character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion. Aristotle states in Nicomachean Ethics that it's not easy to define in rules which actions are ethical. This requires judgment of an ethical leader, someone with a good moral character who regularly decides what actions are appropriate and reasonable in different situations. The Nicomachean Ethics is Aristotle's attempt to answer the question, what is the best life for a human being and how does one come to live it? The ergon argument motivates Aristotle's account of ethics by responding to the first part of the above question. What is the best life for human beings? According to endoxa, or common wisdom, the good of anything resides in its ergon, that is, its work or function. Further, the ancient Greek philosophers, such as Aristotle, concluded that being ethical plays a prominent part in a happy life. The ergon argument is the basis from which Aristotle argues that the good life, or eudaimon, is the life spent in rational activity in accordance with virtue. Such a life requires using practical reason informed by our emotional insights to actively evaluate our specific and personal circumstances and identify and act in accordance with virtue. Where virtue is a mean between two extremes, the extreme of excess and deficiency. The virtuous person acts this way habitually throughout his reasonably long life and gets pleasure from doing so. Utilitarianism and deontology are right action theories about what you should do. Virtue ethics does not ask, what should we do? Instead, virtue ethics asks, who should we be? So virtue ethics is primarily a theory about character, not a theory about acts and action. Virtue ethics is also called character ethics. Virtue ethics emphasizes character as well as the action done. The good action in a situation is the action an ethical person would do if acting virtuously. Actions are judged as the virtuous person would judge them, and the virtuous person judges them according to ideals as proportionate in the specific situation. The ideals are related to true human values and not merely making people subjectively satisfied, as in consequentialist ethics. Because decisions are made by judging how to actualize ideals in the specific context, virtue ethics is concerned with what is the kind thing to do, the honest thing to do, the just thing to do under these conditions. Strength of character means possessing many virtues and knowing the right thing to do in a situation. As I said before, virtue ethics focuses on the character, personal values, and integrity of the individual. It seeks a full and detailed description of those character traits or virtues that would constitute a good and full human life. Virtue ethics recognizes that human beings act in and from character. Virtue ethics emphasizes building character by practicing virtues to become a more ethical or better person. The good action in a situation is that action an ethical person would do if acting virtuously. You can model your actions on someone that you consider to be virtuous. What action would be taken in this situation by Socrates, Gandhi, or Martin Luther King? Virtue ethics trains the mind so that what satisfies us fits what is actually good. Once one has become a virtuous person, the temptations of wrong behavior lose their allure because the long-term negative consequences are seen as accompanying the seeming gains it brings. According to Aristotle, happiness results from living a life of virtue. One's character and practicing virtues daily make one a good person. Aristotle's virtue ethics emphasizes striving for the middle path between extremes, such as bravery as the middle way between rashness and cowardice. Thus, a good character aims to possess virtues such as generosity, bravery, kindness, courage, honesty, loyalty, patience, benevolence, and tolerance. Intellectual virtues are developed through education, whereas moral virtues are developed by repeating appropriate acts. To become virtuous, one strives to release bad character habits, called vices, such as greed or cowardice, and develop virtues. Deriving pleasure from a virtuous act means that one has now acquired a virtue. Our goal should be moderation, according to Aristotle. The extremes, rage and apathy, are undesirable. Aristotle's advice is for us to seek the middle path. Virtue is a means between two extremes of excess and deficiency. For Aristotle, it's not the consequences or your emotions that matter, but what you do that counts. The fact that you're scared or angry does not make you a good or bad person. It's how you act. And it is important not to either overreact or underreact. So each of the ethical theories has certain strengths and areas in which they perform well and certain areas in which they don't perform as well. What are some of the strengths of Aristotle's virtue ethics? One of its strengths is that being ethical is about being a good person, a lifetime of behavior, not just individual actions. Ethical behavior then becomes part of a life of human flourishing, and ethical behavior may vary from person to person, but it's not relativism. Instead, it depends on what the virtuous person would do in that particular situation. Now, there are also some criticisms or areas in which virtue ethics does not form as well. Virtue ethics can only offer general advice and role models, but no objective guidelines, because that's not what it does. And it can be very difficult to identify a good role model. Before one has acquired a virtue and is able to judge virtuously for oneself and thus be one's own ethical role model or ethical standard, one must follow the guide of or model oneself on an already virtuous person. Even if you can recognize such a person, finding this virtuous person may not be easy. Unless you can make several comparisons, experience indicates that most people will be misled. A good rule of thumb for finding a virtuous model or guide is that following a good model helps one develop into being one's own standard. Following a poor model only intensifies rote reliance on that particular model's performance, actions, or opinions. A second problem with virtue ethics involves the question, are traits that are impressive in contemporary culture really virtues? Many people find it hard to distinguish character traits that are virtues from those which are impressive because of certain contemporary cultural phenomena. What makes something a virtue? Is someone who is admired in contemporary culture a good role model? A third problem is that virtue ethics involves some degree of cultural relativism. Different cultures embody different virtues. Of course, consequential ethics has this problem as well. What people prefer or what makes them happy differs across culture too. But in general, virtue ethics is vague on what specific virtues to practice. And then the fourth problem with virtue ethics is the conflict problem. How does virtue ethics handle dilemmas, cases in which different virtues are in conflict because they point in opposite directions? For example, charity prompts me to kill the suffering person who would be better off dead, but justice forbids it. Honesty points to telling the hurtful truth, but kindness and compassion call me to remain silent or even lie to spare someone's feelings. So really, what should I do? it can sometimes be hard to know which virtue takes precedence.